I could see a deeper truth being expressed than I'd ever heard in church in what Jesus was saying. I saw, and I immediately had a deep realization of what he was talking about.
There was a couple went to church, a wife and husband, and they came back from church where they heard exactly what you just said. The pastor was reading from the Bible, and the wife says to the husband, you know, outside our bedroom we have this little hill or mound that blocks our view. What I'm going to do tonight, I'm going to believe that it's going to disappear, because if Jesus says you can move mountains, surely you can move this little hill. And the husband says, that's a good idea. Okay, so the next morning, the wife opens the curtains, and it's still there. And she says to her husband, oh, you see, I knew it wasn't going to work. So that's not faith either. So just telling yourself, I believe this is going to happen, probably not, unless you're lucky. But faith, the true meaning of faith is power. And if you have faith, means if you access the power that lies beyond all phenomena, if you access the source of life, if you find access to that, then that means you have faith. Faith is sensing in yourself the power of life itself, which is not of the person, which is deeper. The power of consciousness itself. Sensing that in yourself, and when you connect with that, you realize it's not so much that you connect with it, it's just that is the essence of who you are. So having faith really is being fully who you are in your essence. And of course, the way to that, this is our entire teaching here, is to go beyond the noisy mind or whatever the mind produces into the dimension of alive stillness. And that's, you're touching the source. If you touch the source, so the personality needs to surrender so that you can go deeper. Otherwise, the personality, which includes the thinking mind, or is primarily the thinking mind, stands as a closed door. With a heavy personality, you cannot go any deeper. You're stuck. There's a closed door of the personality. So there's the Russian spiritual teacher Gurdjieff mentioned two aspects of a human being, which he called personality and essence. And he says some people, or most people in this world, have a strongly developed personality, but there's very little essence coming through. So essence is who you are beyond the personality. And he said occasionally it happens that there's an enormous amount of essence in rare human beings and very little personality. So most people you meet in this world have a fairly highly developed personality, especially in the Western world, but the whole world is becoming Westernized. So even in the East now, you get people with big personalities. But if the personality recedes, and this is happening to us, then something more vital and more essential can shine through, and that is essence. And that then and that is our life purpose.
The kingdom of heaven, somebody used that expression. My translation is, kingdom is dimension, heaven, sky, is spaciousness. So when Jesus talked about the kingdom of heaven, he's pointing to something in the sense-perceived world in order to get people to sense what he's talking about on the inner level. So he chose the sky or heaven because it's the most spacious thing there is, and it is not, the sky is perhaps the only thing in this dimension of sensory perception, the only thing that you can see that's not a thing. Because the sky doesn't exist as a sky. There is no such thing as sky. You can never touch it or be in it, or if you go up in a rocket, you go through a cloud, but you can never say, I am now in the sky, because there is no sky. It's just a way in which we perceive spaciousness. And so he used that analogy in order to point to something within you, the dimension of spaciousness, the kingdom of heaven, the dimension of spaciousness that is within you, that is consciousness, pure consciousness. That is the only thing, the most important thing, he said, the most important thing for you to be concerned about. Find that within you. Everything else will fall into place. It's a free translation of what he said. Everything else will fall into place. Just your primary task as a human being here is to find that dimension of consciousness in you. Then you have fulfilled your task as a human being. Not that necessarily your life will then come to an end, because you can then be here in a much more beneficent capacity, because something else expresses itself through you, no longer the egoic, the limited ego identity, and it can speak and act and do or just emanate through you into this world. You become an expression of the transcendent dimension. I don't use the word God very often because it's misleading. First of all, it's because it's been misunderstood and misused over so many centuries. And also because the term itself seems to encapsulate it as if it were something that is a finite thing, God. Almost everybody imagines some kind of entity when you say God. Where is he? Oh, he, you see, most people still call him he. God is a slightly better pointer would be to say, for example, what I said just now, the dimension of the transcendent. And even what they used in Star Wars, that became so popular, again, is a term they used that is not as encapsulated as the term God. The Force. May the Force be with you. Okay, where's the Force? It's everywhere. It's a kind of, there was a slight spiritual message in that, and this is why so many people loved, because they're all looking for it somewhere. They loved it. May the Force be with you. The divine, you could even say, this is less enclosed than the term God. The divine is more an open concept. God is more of a closed concept, and inevitably, because of misuse, people inevitably imagine some kind of male entity still. You can't get away from that. And a controlling one, a patriarch. or somebody who is not done a good job. I could have done better than God, therefore God does not exist. You hear that sometimes.
Doing God's will is an expression been around for a long time that has been misused a lot by the ego, and it was, in most cases, it was the ego's will, and the ego called its own will God's will, to the point of insanity, where people kill others and other groups of people and call it God's will. Different religions have done that. In some, it's still happening. And for many other people who are not at such an extreme of unconsciousness, but nevertheless, there are people who are genuinely wanting to do God's will, but it's very problematic, because how do you know whether a thought that comes into your head is God's will, or whether it's just a thought that comes into your head? So, being in the present moment really is the only way of being certain that you are becoming aligned with God's will. What is God's will? God's will is being one with the intelligence, the consciousness that pervades and underlies the world of form, being one with that. And you can only be one with that if you become present in the now. So the entry point into God's will, the realization of God's will, is always the present moment. Your inner alignment with the present moment, and there you have it. Now you could say that whatever happens, you could say, in some religions, or many religious people do that, well, it's God's will. They can't explain it, but they say, well, it's God's will. I don't usually use that terminology. All I say is, it is as it is. That doesn't require any belief whatsoever, because nobody can doubt that the present moment is as it is, always. Now, this is something you cannot doubt. But if I say, this is God's will, of course you can doubt that. There's lots of reasons why you can doubt that. So the statement, it is as it is, and I might as well say yes to it because it already is something that is beyond any doubt. It is so obviously true that no philosopher could come and question that this moment is as it is. So this is an ultimate truth.
I was visiting my mother not long after that, and she had on her bookshelves, my mother was not religious or even spiritual, but I found the New Testament there, which had been left there many years ago when my mom was still married by a Jehovah's Witness, because my father would always invite the Jehovah's Witnesses into our home and then involve them in discussions. He had a love-hate relationship with them, and this is just he respected them enormously because my father was German, so he respected them enormously because they were the few people in Germany who refused to, in the Second World War, who refused to participate in war. So they were pacifists, and many were brought to concentration camps and died because they refused to take up arms. And my father respected them highly for that, but when they started talking to him, he would get angry. But he must have accepted this New Testament. Anyway, I found that New Testament on my mother's bookshelf, and I opened it at that point. Of course, I had read it at school. I had a Catholic upbringing. I had read it at school, but then I read it, and I said, wow, I could see a deeper truth being expressed than I'd ever heard in church in what Jesus was saying. I saw, and I immediately had a deep realization of what he was talking about, and realizing also that the New Testament is really fragments, because nobody has a complete teaching of Jesus, because people have the fragments that they remembered and they eventually wrote down. And I believe not all fragments are actually said by Jesus, but when they did, the ones that are actually uttered, but I knew beyond any doubt that certain things that I read were actually said by someone who was deeply aligned with consciousness. So I saw the truth there, and that shed light on it. And then you become aware of yourself as the one who is perceiving, but not of yourself as the historical person, because if you were perceiving through the historical person, you would be labeling things mentally. No, you become aware of yourself as the underlying consciousness in which the perception happens, the light of consciousness in which the perception happens. So you're aware of two dimensions, the dimension of form and the dimension of formless consciousness, the kingdom of heaven, the dimension of spaciousness, the emptiness, the spaciousness, the essence of all life. And it's not yours, it's not anybody's, it's the one. And now, as if you're thinking in terms of, well, how does that fit in with God? You haven't mentioned God. Well, that's true. I haven't mentioned God because the term God has been misunderstood a lot over the millennia, not by everybody, but by most. God, you cannot understand God. It's just absurd to even make any statement, because it's totally, language consists of just a few sounds. Just a few sounds that are made by the vocal cords and air pressure. So you have the vowels A, E, I, O, U, A, O, U, U, and then you add a few air pressure sound. Are you expecting to understand the secret of the universe through the combination of a few and you're asking God to explain God, but I'll carry on talking anyway. One can only give almost a poetic image or an analogy of what that is. God is the source of all life, the transcendent source of all life. It has no existence in space and time. It does not exist, because exist means to be manifested. It is God is the source of all life. That we perhaps can say. Now, we could compare that, because we live in this sense-perceived universe in our dimension. We could compare God to the life-giving principle that we all share, which is the sun. And it's no coincidence that many ancient cultures worshipped the sun, because obviously without the sun all life would immediately disappear. The very warmth in your body ultimately derived from the sun, calories. So the sun continuously emanates. One could almost say, yes, it has a lifespan, but relative to our lifespan, it's eternal. So it's an analogy. The sun continuously emanates. It emanates, and what it emanates is it gives life.